Well, Rob, thank you so much for being here with us today. The CSE has really become kind of the go-to exchange for cannabis companies. Why do you think that's been the case?
Well, there's a couple of good reasons for that. One is that when the federal government changed the rules for medical marijuana and they wanted to ensure that there were corporations with compliance procedures and the capital investment necessary to create a proper growing environment where they could have quality control, a lot of companies started to get into it. They needed to access capital before they were in revenue. So the banks weren't an option. So an obvious option for them was equities. So very similar to mining exploration business, where we have a lot of public companies in Canada. Well, we decided that they were pursuing a legitimate business, and we could list them at an early stage of their development. So provided that they had significant progress towards creating their operation and were somewhere deep into the application process with Health Canada, we were able to list them and help them get access to capital. So that was the first thing. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing was that a lot of U.S. companies started looking north of the border, and they said, boy, the cannabis sector is growing in Canada. They're getting access to capital. It's very difficult here in the United States. And as you know, in the United States, they have a problem with the federal law says it's illegal, but there's several states where it's legal. So we took the same position as the Securities Commissions did and said, provided there's good disclosure for investors that talks about the difficulties of that environment and what the risks are and whether or not there is a risk to them as shareholders, and then provided that disclosure is there and it's up front, and then we can also list those companies. So we now have, I think it's 67 companies in the cannabis sector, and more than 24 of those have assets or operations south of the border.
I mean, it's interesting, you know, I believe the exchange is valued around $9 billion. Yes. A good portion of that, about $5.5 billion of that, is from cannabis companies. Right. Is that something that you think will continue over the months and years to come?
Well, it's quite possible, but we don't have a crystal ball. But at the moment, we have a very large number of applications, and several of those are from companies in the United States that already have revenue and profit that are in the cannabis sector. So we expect to see more of them go public in Canada and list on the CSE this year.
So, Rob, switching hats a little bit here, if I'm an investor and I'm new to the cannabis space, what should I know? What are some of the things that I should keep in mind when I'm looking at investing in cannabis companies?
Well, I think you need to do research. That's obvious. But there are different ways to invest in the sector. There are companies that want to focus only on cultivation. There's others that are vertically integrated, and they go from seed to sale, as they say. And then there's others that are suppliers to the cannabis sector who are in ancillary products or ancillary services. People like to analogize to the gold rush, and they said that the people that made the most money sold picks and shovels. So, and because the cannabis sector is still growing at a rapid rate due to the process of legalization, both for medical marijuana use and for adult use, there are going to be more and more opportunities for these companies to grow. So for that reason, I still think that there are going to be investment opportunities in the cannabis sector.
Well, Rob, thanks so much for your insights, and we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Angela.